Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm assuming that a lot of you who clicked on this video are here from Tumblr, and if so, you probably already know who I am. But for those of you who may not know, I am Alex, and I am going to be starting this channel to review a lot of books and movies. The first one that I'm going to be reviewing is, of course, my favorite book, Moby Dick. Why do I want to do this? I don't know. I have no idea why I want to sit on camera and talk about a 200-year-old book about whales. But I do. Part of the reason being because I'm kind of insane about it. I am dressed like Captain Ahab, or at least my version of Captain Ahab, which is sort of a femme version. AFAB Ahab, if you will. Which basically just means I'm wearing a corset and I have on big fancy platform boots because I'm short and I like to pretend like I'm not short. So a lot of you probably already know what Moby Dick is about, or at least have a general idea of what it's about. Most people, I think that they know what it's about, but they are often surprised when I tell them what actually happens in the story, because it's a very strange story. And personally, I like to break the book down into 3 distinct parts. There is the rom-com, of course, as any good book should have. There is the 1800s Whaling Encyclopedia, which is probably the largest portion of the book. It's also the part of the book that I think a lot of people get lost during and don't make it to the end because it is a lot, and it's not all very interesting. And the third part of the book is the horrors, which is kind of self-explanatory, I think. 3 of these parts. But first of all, I would like to go over some of the characters, because this book has a lot of very interesting characters. And I'm just going to be going through them in the order that they appear. So the first character that we meet is Ishmael, of course. The opening line, "Call me Ishmael," I think you have probably heard before, or you have at least heard it parodied in other movies and books. The opening line, "Call me Ishmael," is actually supposed to be instant foreshadowing, because Ishmael is a name that means outcast or orphan, and you will see why that is important later on. It is sort of speculated on that Ishmael's not even his real name. It is probably just a pseudonym that the narrator adopted because of how on the nose it is about what takes place in the book. The Ishmael that's actually writing the book is much older. This is a story that's happened many, many years ago. Don't worry about how many, it's not important. The Ishmael that we actually meet in the narration is a young school teacher who is dealing with seasonal depression, and it is November, so he says, "Fuck it, I'm going to sea," as one does when one is depressed. He has never been whaling, but he decides, I'm going to go join a whaling voyage, and I'm going to be a whaler. This is a good idea. Why the fuck not? So he heads off to New England, as one does when one is depressed and wants to be a whaler. That's pretty much what I did too. There he stays at a very ominous inn, which has a very ominous painting. He attends a very ominous church service, and he gets married. It's been 2 days. He just met this man. He also discovers what clam chowder is, and then eventually signs up with a whaling crew and heads out to sea. One defining characteristic of Ishmael is that he loves whales. Like, maybe too much. I'm a marine biologist, and I have worked with whale scientists, and I have never met anybody who loves whales as much as Ishmael. This man is an absolute freak for whales. And he spends most of the book just kind of talking about whales, and how much he likes whales, and what his thoughts and feelings about whales are. One of the things that makes the book so funny is the fact that a lot of his whale facts are just straight up incorrect. And some of them are just outdated, but others I think he just pulled straight out of his ass because they make absolutely no goddamn sense. My favorites are that narwhal horns would be good for turning the pages of books. That orcas kill bigger whales by grabbing onto their lips like a leech and hanging on there until the whale is worried to death, which is not what they do. And that sperm whales are the largest species of whales, which Herman Melville would have known is not true. But Ishmael is just a special little guy, you know? He doesn't care about how factual things are. It's more about getting you in the mood of whale. Whale is a mood. He also insists that whales are fish, despite acknowledging evidence to the contrary, such as, you know, they lactate and they breathe air and they have internal anatomy similar to a mammal. But that doesn't matter, they're fish. They have fish vibes, they're fish. There is one part where he tells you to go to hell if you do not scream and cheer when you see a dolphin, and honestly, I respect that. Go to hell if you don't scream and cheer when you see a dolphin. There are 7 consecutive chapters in this book about whale heads. He is comparing the head of a sperm whale and the head of a right whale, and he goes on about that for 7 chapters. This man is a goddamn freak about whales, and I love him. He is so weird. I want to study him, quite honestly. The next major character that we meet is Queequeg. I don't know where Herman Melville came up with this name. And neither does anybody else. Herman Melville just makes shit up. Queequeg is Ishmael's husband. And yes, I did say that correctly. They are husbands. There is a canon gay romance in this book, which I did not know going into it. So when I first read this, I honestly thought that I had somehow accidentally picked up somebody's very well-written copy of, like, Moby Dick fan fiction. And I was like, what the fuck is going on here? But you know what? It is real. It is real. So let's back up a little bit. Queequeg is a cannibal Polynesian prince who comes from a fictional island in the South Pacific, who came to America to learn about Christianity, then immediately decided he did not like Christianity, and became a whaler instead. I know that's a lot of information, but we are just fucking beginning. He meets Ishmael because the inn that they are staying at is out of rooms, and they have to share. It is the first case that I have ever seen of the there was only one bed trope that is common in fan fiction. So anyway, they share a bed, and they cuddle, and then the very next night they get married. But it is very cute. They have like a little wedding ceremony, they do a pagan ritual, they kiss, and then they get into bed and cuddle and tell each other their whole life story. But one thing that we learn very quickly is that Queequeg is just as much of a freak as Ishmael. They are perfect for each other. He is a weird dude, and he is not shy about it. The very first night, he was out on the town trying to sell a severed human head. As one does in New England, I suppose. But ultimately he was unsuccessful, so instead he gave it to Ishmael as a wedding present, and Ishmael was like, "Ah, thanks." He has apparently eaten people, like cannibal eaten people, and that's never really elaborated on. I think that that would be one of my first questions if I were in a relationship with a cannibal is, hey, do you like really eat people, bro? He also uses his harpoon as an eating utensil, like he just straight up uses it to like grab food from the other end of the table and then eats it. I really hope that he cleaned that first, because that would be gross. And one thing that Queequeg really loves is committing to a bit. He just does weird shit constantly, and when anybody questions it, he's like, this is just how we do it where I'm from. I don't know what to tell you. Like when they first get on the ship, there is a guy sleeping on one of the benches, and Queequeg just sits on him. And Ishmael is like, bro, what are you doing? And Queequeg is like, what? Where I'm from, we just have guys sitting around, and like that's what we sit on instead of chairs. It's not weird. I once saw somebody describe Queequeg as being kind of like Kramer from Seinfeld, and honestly I think that that's a pretty accurate description. He's just a weird dude, and he likes fucking with people. I actually would not be surprised if he weren't actually a cannibal at all, and he just learned that that was a stereotype and decided to go with it. The next character is Starbuck, like the coffee. So I was out getting my prescriptions earlier, and I thought it would be funny for if, in this video, I had a Starbucks cup when I was talking about Starbuck the character. And then I had to wait in line for like 20 minutes to get a stupid latte, and I don't even really like Starbucks coffee. So, you all better appreciate this bit. Anyway, Starbuck is the first mate, so he is the second in command behind the captain. He is a Quaker from Nantucket, and true to his religion, he is a pacifist. He is the most calm motherfucker on the planet. He at one point gets a loaded gun pointed at his face and doesn't even raise his voice. He's actually scared of whales because his dad and his brother were killed by a whale, so that's understandable. But this is his job, so he's gonna do it to the best of his ability. He's kind of the only normal guy on this whole ship. He kind of acts as a balance to Ahab, and pretty much the only guy who realizes from the get-go that this might be a bad idea. And eventually their dynamic culminates into something romantic? They definitely have something going on between them in the last chapters. But we'll talk more about that when we get there. Stub. Oh boy. What is there to say about Stub? Have you ever known a guy who was kind of like the class clown, and he was always just being a real goofball, and at first it's kind of funny, but then there are situations that arise in which you need to be more serious, and he does not drop the facade ever, and you start to realize, oh my fucking god, this isn't a bit, this is just his personality. That's who Stub is. He's from Cape Cod, because of course he is. And he smokes constantly, and I don't think it's just tobacco. I think there's something else in there. And he is married to the sister of one of the guys who owns the ship. So, that kind of makes his presence on the ship more understandable, honestly. If he were my brother-in-law, I would also want to get rid of him. Flask. Flask is just a little guy. He's just a small little dude. And he hates whales personally because they're bigger than him, and he finds that offensive, which is quite possibly the funniest reason ever to go whaling. He and Stub kind of become best buddies over the course of the book, but he doesn't really have a lot to do with that. It's mostly Stub who just kind of like grabs him and starts like talking at him, and he's just kind of like nodding along like, yeah, can you shut the fuck up, please? But it's an interesting dynamic. They're buddies as much as they can be. Tashtego. Tashtego is one of the 3 harpooneers on the ship, for now. Tashtego is from the Wampanoag tribe of Gay Head, and he is a very experienced hunter on both land and sea. Apparently he used to hunt moose, and I guess that's kind of understandable that he wanted to level up from moose to whales. I don't think that there's really anything else you can do on land that is equivalent to a moose. He performs a lot of the very specific tasks on the ship, like getting the sperm out of the whale. That's not a euphemism. That is, a sperm whale's head. Their big stupid heads are full of a white substance called spermaceti. So when I talk about sperm, I'm not talking about like cum, I'm talking about like the whale goop. The second harpooneer, or I guess, yeah, the third harpooneer on the ship is Dagu. We don't really know a lot about Dagu. He's just kind of the strong, silent type. We do know that he is from somewhere in Africa. I don't think Ishmael ever says where. Likely that he does not even know. But he joined a whaling ship when he was very young and has traveled all over the world as a whaler. So those are the 3 harpooneers on board. There's Tashtego, Queequeg, and Dagu. Those are the only 3 for now. Pip. Pip is a 12-year-old boy from Connecticut. That sucks. R.I.P. Pip. But he's also referred to as the Alabama boy, and I don't know why. I don't think they ever really explain that. He's sort of a cabin boy and sort of like a jester. He has a tambourine that he plays, and he sings and dances, and is generally entertaining to everybody in the beginning, and then something kind of horrible and traumatic happens to him, and then everybody just thinks he's crazy. We'll talk about that later, but that incident really leads to him and Ahab bonding, and it's kind of adorable. And that leads me to my bestie, my boy, Ahab. This section's going to be very long. We don't actually meet Ahab until they're a few weeks out to sea. He spent a lot of time in his cabin, and then just kind of comes out to pace around ominously at night, as one does. But we do learn a lot about Ahab before we ever meet him, because people really like to talk about him. So Ahab's mom was an interesting lady. She apparently named him after an evil biblical king and then immediately died, so he is an orphan, and that's never elaborated on. Apparently he once committed actual human murder and desecrated an altar, and that is also never elaborated on. He may have also been hit by lightning, which again is never really elaborated on. He has a scar that's described as looking like it was made by lightning, but we don't ever find out what really caused it, or if it's a scar or a birthmark. But in the 1956 movie, they do say that he was hit by lightning, so that's what I'm going with. And honestly, that seems exactly like the kind of thing that would happen to Ahab, so it makes sense. One of the ship's owners describes him as an ungodly, godlike man, and God, I wish somebody would describe me like that just once in my life. But that's not all. No, as you probably already know, Moby Dick ate Ahab's leg, and that is why Ahab wants revenge. But there is more to the story than that. So Ahab was basically just out doing his job hunting whales, and comes across Moby Dick, who he tries to hunt, and Moby is having none of that shit, so he destroys all the boats, and then chews Ahab alive, eating his leg in the process. Ahab is in a coma for a while after that, and when he wakes up, he is just absolutely batshit insane, because, you know, a whale ate his leg and he was just in a coma. But the crew is kind of freaked out by him, so instead of, you know, doing anything that might help him, they lace him up in a straitjacket and leave him in his hammock for, like, weeks. And this is when Ahab really loses his mind, and decides that the whale is a physical manifestation of all of the suffering inflicted upon humanity by God. Naturally. Eventually he calms down enough that the crew let him out, and they make him a new leg out of the jawbone of a sperm whale, which is super fucking cool. But unfortunately, having a fake leg means that you can, you know, break it, and he does, and he falls on it and impales himself. So he's having a really fucking bad time. And he blames it all on the whale, because as we've already established, he believes that the whale is God, and God is controlling everything. So if Ahab can kill the whale, he can forever break humanity free of the bonds of a cruel and uncaring God, so that is what he sets out to do. You may have noticed that earlier in the video, I said that there were 3 harpooneers for now. Well, here comes number 4. Apparently before the ship ever set sail, Ahab smuggled a guy named Fedallah and a bunch of his friends onto the ship, and they've just been, like, hiding there somewhere for, like, months. So during the very first whale chase, they all just pop out of their hiding spot, and everybody's like, what the fuck? Where did these dudes come from? Fedallah is the leader of this top secret whale hit squad, and he and Ahab are apparently very good friends. But we never really learn, like, where he's from, or, like, what his deal is. He just kind of shows up and is there. And also he can see the future. He is a deeply fascinating character to me. He is honestly probably my favorite secondary character, just because he's so weird, and I know so little about him. And I want to know what his deal is. But I will never find out, because Herman Melville is dead, and I can't ask him. And you may be thinking to yourself at this point, this actually seems like a very diverse crew. I would not expect that from a novel that was written by a white American man in the 1800s. And you're correct, it is a surprisingly diverse crew. But it was written by a white American man in the 1800s, so don't get your hopes up too high. A lot of this did not age well. But Herman Melville tried. I'll give him points for that, he tried. And finally in our character analysis, we have Moby Dick. Yes, I am including the whale in my character breakdown, and you can't stop me. And let's just get this out of the way right now. Yes, his name is probably a penis joke. He is a big white sperm whale named Dick. Of course it's a penis joke. And fun fact, he was actually based on a real white sperm whale named Mocha Dick. So it's not really hard to imagine a bunch of really bored whalers just sitting around making penis jokes, and then one of them accidentally sticks and becomes famous and inspires a novel. That's pretty funny, actually. We don't actually meet Moby Dick until the last 3 chapters of the book, but that doesn't mean that he's not around. He's always being discussed. Other ships that they encounter are always saying that they just saw him, like, yesterday, and he went that way. There is even a mysterious phantom whale spout that they keep seeing, which is there to remind us that Moby Dick is always lurking, just out of sight. The whale is the text. He is the book. He is the blank space between the words. He is always around. He is always there. He is always watching you. Anyway, Moby Dick is not a normal whale, as I'm sure you could guess. Firstly, he's white, which is not the usual color of sperm whales. Usually they are gray. Secondly, he is abnormally large and very, very aggressive. He frequently destroys ships and eats people, which whales are not usually known to do. There has been no recorded evidence of a sperm whale ever eating a human being. But Moby Dick is just a hater, so he does what he wants. Thirdly, he is kind of fucked up. He has a crooked jaw, and tons of scars and harpoons protruding out of his back like rows of spines, and trailing ropes behind him that writhe around like tentacles. I'm exaggerating some of this, but that's how he looks in my head. And he's also immortal. Lots of people have tried to kill this whale, and none of them have been successful. And people ascribe a lot of other supernatural traits to him as well. They think he can control the weather. They say that he can, like, teleport and be everywhere at once, and people from opposite sides of the world have seen him on the same day within hours of each other. And there is even a guy who proclaims to be the archangel of the whale. Like, the whale is his god, and he is the angel of the whale. He is seemingly able to, like, summon him, which is fucking wild. And we don't talk about that enough. That is, like, an actual plot point in the book, that this dude can, like, summon Moby Dick. And that just is not mentioned enough. But for everybody who thinks that the whale is supernatural, there are also obviously people who just think that he's a normal-ass whale. Because when we do eventually meet Moby Dick, he doesn't do anything explicitly supernatural. He's just kind of a normal whale. I mean, he's, you know, kind of a freak of nature, but he acts like a normal whale. So is Moby Dick a normal whale? Or is he actually a god or a demon or some other kind of eldritch entity? Well, you get to be the judge of that, because it's open to interpretation. But you would be wrong if you said that he is a normal whale, because he is God. So we start out with Ishmael explaining that he is very sad and thus running away to sea, which is very relatable because that's exactly what I did after college. So he heads off to New England and stays at a place called the Spouter Inn, owned by a man named Peter Coffin. Fun fact about that, I actually live like an hour away from a place called the Spouter Inn, which apparently predates the publishing of Moby Dick. And I almost rented an apartment from a guy named Travis Coffin. So, am I saying that Moby Dick actually takes place in Maine? Probably not, but that is a weird coincidence, right? So the Spouter Inn is out of rooms, so Ishmael has to share a bed. And Ishmael is like, I don't want to do that. Can I just sleep on this bench? And Peter Coffin is like, sure, let me just turn it into a bed real quick. So he, like, pulls tools out of wherever he was keeping them behind the bar and starts trying to, like, carve the fucking bench into a bed, and Ishmael is like, oh my god, stop, please stop that. I'll take the room with the other guy. Just stop doing what you're doing, please. But because Queequeg is out on the town trying to sell his severed human head, Ishmael is initially alone in the room, and he is a total fucking weirdo, and tries on Queequeg's clothes and goes through all of his stuff. And then he gets into bed, and when Queequeg comes back, he is understandably surprised with this strange man that's in his bed, and he starts screaming and chasing him around, threatening to kill him, and Ishmael is also running around screaming, and it's like a sitcom. It's really funny, actually. Luckily, Peter Coffin shows up and calms everybody down. He did not bother to inform Queequeg that there would be a strange man in his bed, which seems a little bit fucked up to me, but... so now everything is calmed down, and they go to bed together. Just Ishmael and Queequeg. Peter Coffin is not in the bed too. And they wake up spooning, which Ishmael seems to enjoy. He also watches Queequeg get dressed and describes him in pretty intense detail. So you're getting the feeling at this point that something gay is happening. You're just not sure what yet. That day Ishmael attends whale church. When you're reading the book, it does not really register how weird of a concept whale church is, because, like, so much other weird shit has happened up to this point. You're just kind of going with it. But yeah, it's like a church that's designed to look like a whaling ship. And it's pretty fucking sick, actually. And it's full of memorials for whalers who died at sea. And Ishmael is sitting there thinking like, wow, I might die at sea. And anyway, the sermon is about Jonah and the whale, of course, because, like, what else would you talk about at whale church? There aren't that many whale-themed Bible stories. It is also super ominous, as everything has been up to this point, and foreshadows a lot of the events that are going to happen later. After the sermon, Ishmael goes back to the inn and, like I said earlier, gets married. And they are genuinely perfect for each other because they are both freaks, and they are both the only two people in the world who would share a bed with somebody out of necessity and come away from that being like, yeah, we're married now. What of it? So now that they are husband and wife, which is Ishmael's words, not mine, he is the wife, which he says, they head over to Nantucket together, and they stay at an inn/chowder restaurant in which Ishmael discovers what clam chowder is for the first time. He goes to a chowder restaurant, and when the lady who works there asks him if he wants clam or cod, he's like, a single clam? Just one raw, cold clam? That's a bit of a clammy reception. And somehow she does not kick him out immediately, and instead they stay there for several days. And they share a bed even though they don't have to, which I think is very cute. Queequeg basically tells him, go find a whaleboat, pick whichever one you like, and we'll sign on together. I trust you. He shouldn't, but he does. And after looking at a bunch of normal boats, Ishmael settles on the one that is decked out in like whale teeth and whale bones like a fucking ghost ship from Pirates of the Caribbean. And there Ishmael meets the two owners of the ship. Captain Ahab is not the owner of the ship, it is actually these two other guys. And they have a very funny dynamic. They're kind of like the two old Muppets that like heckle each other. And Ishmael is trying to convince them to hire him even though he has no experience whaling. And so he's like giving them his resume, and all of a sudden one of them's like, shut the fuck up. You're an idiot and you're hired. And then later on when Ishmael and Queequeg go to actually board the ship, they are approached by a random man named Elijah, who is a prophet, and tells them a bunch of really ominous stuff about Captain Ahab, and implies that this trip is going to go horribly wrong. And they're just kind of like, okay, that was weird. Let's go. So they get on the ship and embark on their voyage, which has had no red flags up to this point and will definitely end perfectly fine. One thing that you notice very quickly after they leave the port is that Ishmael is no longer narrating things the same way. In the previous section, he was pretty much just narrating it linearly, and occasionally going on very detailed philosophical musings and other things that he's thinking about. But he was basically just describing what was happening in the moment. Now, he is no longer doing that. We've gone off the rails at this point. The whale rails, if you will. During this part of the book, Ishmael spends entire chapters just kind of rambling on about whatever the fuck he wants, which is usually whales and whaling. For every 3 or 4 chapters of Whale Facts, there is a chapter that actually progresses the plot. And that chapter is generally narrated in a linear fashion that just describes what's happening, until we get to the stage directions. Since I don't want this video to be like 5 hours long, I'm not going to go in depth on like all of the Whale Fact chapters. I told you some of the highlights already, like Ishmael telling you to go to hell if you don't scream and cheer when you see a porpoise. So I'm going to stick mostly to the plot, but I need you to understand how much of this book is Whale Facts. It is like 90% Whale Facts and 10% plot. Most of this book is just Whale Facts. And I highly recommend that you read it, and you read the unabridged version and not one of the abridged versions, because the Whale Fact chapters, they do get tedious, but they're honestly like really funny, and they do set the mood very well. The first major plot point after a few rambling Whale Fact chapters is Ahab finally coming out of his cabin for like the first time and revealing his main purpose for this trip, which is to kill Moby Dick, for the aforementioned reasons. So he gathers everybody on deck. He explains that he wants to go kill Moby Dick because Moby Dick is an evil puppet master controlling all of humanity, and gets everybody really hyped up. Everybody is like fucking ready to go kill this whale, okay? I cannot stress that enough. Everybody is like psyched. And then they do a vaguely pagan ritual where they do shots out of the end of a harpoon, and then the narration shifts to stage directions while they have a dance party and talk about girls. But it establishes a few key things. 1, Ahab is using this trip as a revenge mission. 2, Starbuck is the only one who thinks that this might be a bad idea. And 3, everybody else on board is very excited about this. They are ready to kill this fucking whale. And some of them have even encountered the whale before. Some of the harpooneers already know who Moby Dick is, and they have seen him before. He's a very famous whale. He is a very well-known boy. The next major plot point is the first whale hunt of the trip. This is Moby Ricky, by the way. And this is when Ahab finally reveals his top-secret whale hit squad from wherever they have been hiding. So Ishmael and Queequeg are in a whaleboat together. The boat gets flipped by the whale. They do not catch the whale. And then they're just kind of stuck all night in a sinking boat. And eventually the ship finds them, and as soon as they get on board, and Ishmael is like, Queequeg, my buddy, my bestie, my bro. Does one frequently risk their lives in tiny little boats chasing after whales when one is a whaler? And Queequeg is like, yeah. And after checking with 2 other people, Ishmael finally realizes that whaling is in fact quite dangerous, and he goes to make his will, in which he leaves everything to Queequeg, even though, presumably, Queequeg would be in the same boat with him when he dies. But, you know, Queequeg knows what he's doing. He'll probably be fine. As they're sailing around the Cape of Good Hope, they encounter a couple other whaling ships. One of them is super creepy, and their meeting is very ominous, as expected, as everything on this fucking trip has been so far. But the other one is called the Town Ho, and unfortunately, it is now time to talk about Gabriel. This is genuinely one of the more batshit insane plot points of Moby Dick. I'm not going to give you a play-by-play of everything that happens in the Town Ho story because it's fucking insane. But the main point is introducing a character who is named Steelkilt. He is a dude from upstate New York who attempted a mutiny on one ship, failed, and then succeeded in taking over a second ship and proclaiming himself to be the Archangel Gabriel. Gabriel believes himself to be the angel of Moby Dick. The whale is his god, and he serves the whale. And twice in this book, he seemingly, like, sicks the whale on people who pissed him off, and, like, the whale eats them, and he's like, haha, I told you, you shouldn't have pissed me off. And it's important to note that in both of these cases, the whale shows up, eats one person, and then leaves. Like, it's very targeted. It's not something that a normal whale would do. Gabriel is also apparently just like spouting prophecies all the time, and he brings a plague onto the crew of one of the ships. And I guess that could just be a coincidence, like they all just got sick and Gabriel was like, yes, that was me. But like, it seems weird that he's doing all of this shit for no explained reason. But, it's sus. He seems to be kind of supernatural, and I don't like it. So, like, what the fuck is the conclusion of all of this? That this dude from upstate New York is actually an angel, and the whale is actually God, and they have, like, a psychic bond? Yes. Obviously, it is open to interpretation, but I say yes, and you can trust me. I'm fully unbiased and very mentally stable. We are now about halfway through the book, and the crew is finally actually catching whales. Good job, guys. There is a terrifying scene where Tashtego is getting the spermaceti out of the whale head, after they've killed it, obviously. And he falls into the empty whale head, and then the whale head falls into the ocean, with him still inside, and he almost dies, but he gets rescued, luckily. And Ishmael is, like, talking about this like it's the most noble way to die, drowning in whale goop. But it awakened a new fear in me that I did not even know was a thing. And this also serves to highlight once again how brave and strong and handsome Queequeg is, because he is the one who saves Tashtego. And that seems to make Ishmael feel better about the situation. It does not make me feel any better about the situation, but I'm glad that Ishmael has made his peace with it. The next part that we're going to talk about is sort of a soft opening to the horrors section. It's really where you start to feel some of those cosmic horror elements seeping through. Tashtego almost dying was another part where you really get a glimpse into how unsettling this story is, but I think this is really, it's really the moment where you start to feel that. So this chapter is called Castaway. It centers on Pip, who, if you'll remember from earlier, is the cabin boy who is from Connecticut. So one of the whalers got injured while they were whaling, as happens when you are whaling. So Pip fills in on one of the whaleboats. I don't know why, because he is a tiny little child, but he naturally like freaks out and jumps overboard and gets tangled in the ropes, and they have to cut the rope and let the whale go, and then everybody's mad at Pip. And Stubb takes this opportunity to be super racist because he's a fucking asshole, and threatens to sell Pip into slavery if he does that again. But you know, Pip is a tiny little child who is afraid, so he does do it again. And instead of getting tangled in the ropes this time, he just is in the water. And Stubb leaves him. Stubb leaves this child in the water and continues chasing the whale. He does assume that somebody else is going to pick him up, but all of the other whaleboats just, like, I guess don't notice that he fell overboard, so they just leave Pip in the middle of the ocean for, like, a while. And while he's out there just, like, treading water in the middle of the open ocean, something happens to him. He witnesses things beyond his comprehension, and his soul descends into the dark underworld of the sea and never returns. His body stays alive, but his mind is gone, consumed by madness. And this is one of the chapters where you really feel the cosmic horror element, or I guess the proto-cosmic horror, since that wasn't like a genre yet when Herman Melville wrote this. It feels kind of Lovecraftian and eldritch, and very terrifying. Eventually Pip does get rescued, but he is never the same. He genuinely believes that he died at sea, and he's kind of just an empty shell now, because part of him did die, and he can never get that part back. That's honestly something that I kind of relate to, because I have similar feelings about the time that I almost drowned. But, we don't have time to get into any of that, because it's time for the gay whaler orgy sperm squeezing chapter. I don't think I can really do justice to this chapter. Well, these couple chapters, actually. The gay whaler orgy sperm squeezing chapter, and then the chapter where Ishmael wears a whale's penis skin as a raincoat. If you want to know what the fuck is going on there, you're just gonna have to read the book. Sorry. The last thing I want to talk about in this section is the meeting with the British whaling ship. Here we meet Captain Boomer, who also lost a limb to Moby Dick, in his case an arm, and replaced it with an ivory arm, which is sick as fuck. When he and Ahab meet, they do a very interesting handshake, where they, like, cross their prosthetic limbs. It has led to some very beautiful interpretations of how they did this. It's also a pretty bold choice. Like, what if you try to go for that and the other person doesn't, like, reciprocate that energy and it gets awkward? But I suppose Captain Ahab isn't exactly known for playing it safe, so he goes for it and he gets the same energy back. But that is where their similarities end. Unlike Ahab, Boomer is a pretty chill dude. And he wants nothing to do with Moby Dick. He does not want revenge. He wants to never see that whale again. And this seems to be mainly due to the fact that Boomer was actually treated well after losing his arm to a whale. Like, everybody was supportive and nice to him, instead of just, like, tying him up and leaving him in his room for, like, a month. So this is kind of a look at, like, a parallel universe version of Ahab, where he actually was, like, cared for well and didn't go insane and try to kill God. And this parallel is a wonderful transition into the next section. In this part of the book, we are no longer having whale fact chapters. Ishmael very much distances himself from the narrative. He's just kind of an omnipotent third-person narrator now. He knows a lot of things that I don't think he should know, but I guess he's just good at stalking. He is now very absent from the narrative. He's just kind of telling us what other characters are doing, but he is never inserting himself into the situation, and he is not giving us his thoughts and feelings on the subject anymore. And the reason will become apparent. It will become very apparent as to why he is not very present in these chapters. So we open this section with a very heated debate between Starbuck and Ahab, which ends with Ahab almost shooting Starbuck with a gun, and then doing what Starbuck wanted him to do. Immediately after that, Queequeg gets very sick and is dying. And it's a really 1-2 punch in the face for these chapters to be back-to-back. Queequeg requests that the ship's carpenter makes him a custom buoyant waterproof coffin, which he decorates with the same patterns as his tattoos, and then he lays down inside it and waits to die. And the whole crew starts singing and doing all of these elaborate funeral preparations, and it's very emotional, and I might have cried. Yeah. And then suddenly Queequeg is just like, oh shit, I have something to do. I can't die yet. I got something on my to-do list. So he just gets up and is fine. The fucking man that he is. Next up, we have one of my favorite scenes in the book, Ahab making his harpoon. He has the blacksmith melt down a bunch of nails and razor blades, and then has all of the pagan members of the ship bleed on it to temper it, like literally just douse it in human blood, while he screams in Latin about the devil. It's fucking sick. And I'm very curious about this scene. How many razor blades does it take to make a harpoon? And how would Ahab know that? Has he done this before? Did he just, like, pick up a harpoon in one hand and, like, his razor blades in the other and just kind of, like, judge it by weight? And because he uses all of the razor blades that he has to make a harpoon, he swears that he's not going to shave anymore, or sleep, or eat until he kills Moby Dick. So he's doing great. We get even fucking deeper into the madness when they try to kill some more whales and end up in a whaleboat overnight. Ahab and Fedallah have a really wild conversation where Fedallah just casually predicts Ahab's death. He's like, this is how you're gonna die. Don't worry about how I know it. And when you read the book the first time, you don't really realize that that's what's happening. You just think Fedallah's a weird dude who says weird shit. But then when you, like, get to the end and you reconsider this scene in context, you're like, oh. This brings up so many fucking questions for me. Like, did Fedallah know the outcome of this voyage before he agreed to go on it? Or did he just start having these prophetic visions after he got on the ship? And in either of those situations, if he knew that they were all going to die at the end, why is he so cool with it? Like, he isn't trying to stop Ahab. He actually seems to be the one, like, encouraging Ahab. Whereas, Starbuck is the one who wants to, like, steer Ahab back to, like, going home and not trying to kill God. Fedallah seems to be doing the opposite. So that leads me to wonder, like, is Fedallah human? Or is he kind of like Gabriel, where he is just like an avatar of the whale, but in the opposite direction? He's like an avatar of Ahab. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but, like, I don't know what else to think, because, like, this is not how a normal person would react to a prophetic vision in which he dies, you know? Or is it just because Herman Melville doesn't really know how to write characters who aren't white Americans? It's probably that, but, like, a bitch can speculate, you know? And speaking of Gabriel and Fedallah, how many characters in this book can predict the future? Like, there are at least 3 so far, and Pip also gets in on, like, the prophesizing. So, like, what the fuck is going on? You know? Like, these are just straight up people with unexplained supernatural powers. And, like, the whale doesn't explicitly do anything supernatural, but, like, the people in this story are doing supernatural shit. So. And you might say, well, Alex, it doesn't take a prophet to see that this trip is a bad idea. But that's not what I'm talking about, okay? Like, these people know details. Elijah apparently foresaw Ahab getting his leg eaten which, like, how the fuck would you predict that? That's not something that just happens to people. And Fedallah predicts, like, specific details of the ending of the book that he would not be able to know. So yeah, I think that this book is very much about the supernatural, even if the whale is just a normal whale, which he's not. He's a god. And, but, like, all of these dudes are just supernatural, too, in addition to the whale being supernatural. And right after that, we have another arguably supernatural feat. They get caught in a storm, and Ahab wants to keep going deeper into the storm to get to Moby Dick, because Moby Dick is sending the storm to try to knock them off course, obviously. But the storm is very, very bad, and it is trying to push them in the opposite way, and everybody else just wants to, like, give up and turn back for home and, you know, not die in a storm. So this is really the first time that the crew is not really on board with this revenge quest anymore. They are all afraid, they all are worried that they're going to, like, sink in this storm and die. And then lightning strikes the ship, and also hits Ahab's cursed blood harpoon, and lights it on fire, and Ahab just picks it up, and is, like, swinging it around, giving, like, a rousing speech, and fending off a mutiny, and it's cool as fuck. And he's just, like, holding this, like, cursed evil harpoon that's on fire. And then he just fucking, like, grabs it and puts the fire out, and everybody's like, yo, that was cool as hell. I'm back on board with this mission. And in the midst of all of this, there is a moment where Stubb starts singing, because Stubb is so fucking annoying in every crisis, and Starbuck just kind of looks at him and he's like, hey, kill yourself. It's not relevant to the plot, I just think it's really funny. So right after these events have transpired, Starbuck is officially fed up with this, and he contemplates shooting Ahab in his sleep, but ultimately decides not to. I don't know if that was the correct decision, but it's the decision that he made, so. And then the very next day, Ahab is back on his supernatural bullshit. He magnetizes a needle with sheer willpower, seemingly, because all of their compasses turned the opposite direction because the ship got hit by lightning. And I don't think that's how that works, but I'm not an expert, and also, like, why not at this point? So he makes a new compass, magically, and onward they go. And then we get a 1-2 punch of chapters of one of the sweetest moments that Ahab has, where he kind of sees Pip being, like, outcast by the crew and acting kind of insane because, you know, he lost his mind when he was left in the ocean by himself. And he's like, hey, is anybody else going to take care of this small insane child? And then he didn't wait for an answer. And it's very sweet and very wholesome, and I love it a lot. And then we get the first death of the voyage. It's not Pip, don't worry, it's somebody else. I would have rioted if Pip died immediately after that scene. One of the sailors falls off the top of the mast and plunges to his death, and they try to, you know, throw out a life buoy, but it sinks. So instead they take Queequeg's floating coffin and use that as the new life buoy, because that's not ominous at all. Now we're really getting into the thick of it. They meet the Rachel, which is another whaling ship from Nantucket, who encountered Moby Dick recently, and he swam off with one of their whaleboats in tow, and the whaleboat has not been seen since, and the captain is desperately trying to find it because his son was in that whaleboat. Maybe just don't take your son whaling, but... So he asks Ahab to help him search, and Ahab is kind of a dick. He says no, because he has shit to do. He has one thing on his mind, basically. He does not have time for side quests. And Ahab's doing really bad at the moment, if you couldn't tell. He's not even really going into his cabin anymore. He's just always on the deck, watching for the whale. He's not really eating. He sleeps standing up, which is terrifying. He also hasn't shaved in like weeks, so he's starting to look kind of feral. And he's becoming increasingly paranoid that the crew is lying to him and that they actually have seen Moby Dick and they're just not telling him. So he rigs up this crazy ass like rope harness so he can like get hoisted up to the top of the mast and look for himself. And interestingly, he needs somebody to like hold the line and make sure that he doesn't like, you know, fall to his death. And instead of picking somebody that is supportive of him, he picks Starbuck, which is a very interesting choice because Starbuck is the only dude who wants to kill him. But Starbuck does his job, and he watches the line and he makes sure that Ahab doesn't die, because that is what he is here to do. The next ship they encounter is in the middle of holding a funeral for a bunch of people that were just killed by Moby Dick. So we're getting very close. We are now in the last 4 chapters. We're really in it now, boys. The 4th to last chapter is one of my favorites. It focuses on Ahab and Starbuck. They are having a conversation where Starbuck basically begs Ahab to turn back and go home, because they both have, like, you know, families that they want to see again, and Starbuck knows that they're going to die and does not want to. And Ahab goes on this whole monologue about how he spent like 40 years of his life out at sea hunting whales, and he feels like maybe it was all wasted. Like, he has a family, he has a wife and a child, but he barely knows them because he's spent all of his time at sea. And he actually almost let Starbuck talk him into going home. Like, he is so fucking close. And then he's like, no, I can't. Sorry. And while he is deciding this, he and Starbuck make some very, very prolonged eye contact, where it seems like they might kiss, but they don't. Ahab also instructs Starbuck from now on that he is to stay on the ship and not go on any of the whaling hunts, because it's too dangerous and he doesn't want Starbuck to die. So, is he in love with him? Maybe a little. They have a complicated ass relationship and I'm here for it. But it's a very, very emotional scene. They both end up, like, crying, and I'm not going to be able to do it justice. It's, like, really fucking sad. And, like, if you haven't felt bad for Ahab up to this point, this chapter will make you feel bad for Ahab, because he also talks at length about, like, the toll that this voyage has taken on him, and how he no longer feels in control of his own actions. He just feels like he has to keep going. He is unable to stop even if he wanted to. And he attributes this to the will of God, but we, the modern readers, will probably attribute this to, like, you know, severe mental illness. And we see that even though Ahab is, like, losing his grip on reality and, like, kind of going off the deep end in the last few chapters, he's still self-aware, and he knows that this is a bad idea, but he just, like, can't stop. Which, you know, he is a character in a book if you want to get meta, so, like, he obviously can't stop, but it's still really fucking sad. It's kind of a heartbreaking chapter to read. The Chase, Day 1. Are you ready? Are you all fucking ready for the whale? Are you ready? I don't think you are. The whale has been fucking spotted. The whale is in their sights. This is not a drill. They get in the whaleboats and they follow him for a while, but Moby Dick dives and disappears for an hour, so they wait around for a bit. Whaling is just a lot of waiting, I have come to realize. Then the whale comes back up and just immediately grabs Ahab's boat in his mouth and just, like, crushes it. He just, like, absolutely fucks it up. Like, this whale is way too excited to eat people. This whale is not normal. So Ahab falls in the water, obviously, because, like, his boat is now in pieces. And the whale starts circling him and making, like, this whirlpool. And Ahab can't swim because, you know, he only has one leg. So he calls the ship in to, like, chase the whale off, and then he gets, like, pulled into one of the other boats, and he just, like, lays there broken and crying, and it's really fucking sad. He's really not doing good. So they go back to the ship because, like, fuck, that was terrifying, and they continue following him at a distance. The Chase, Day 2. They go after him again in the boats, and once again he just starts wrecking shit. He smashes the boat that Ahab is in again, and breaks Ahab's prosthetic leg. So once again he is bitten off Ahab's leg, and at this point it's just kind of insulting. Like, come on, dude. Really? When they get back on the ship, Starbuck once again begs Ahab to give up and turn back, and Ahab can't. We know he can't. They also have some homoerotic tension, like, in front of the whole crew and God and everybody, while Starbuck is keeping him standing nonetheless, because remember, his leg got broken. So Starbuck is just, like, holding him, and they're, like, staring into each other's eyes and, like, talking about how Ahab sees home in Starbuck's eyes. He literally says, "Ever since I saw you-know-what in your eyes." Just in front of everybody. It's fucking crazy. But while they're standing there being gay, somebody realizes that, oh shit, Fadala's gone. So he's dead. Cool. The chase, day 3. Ahab's got a new leg. He's looking sharp, he's looking great, he's ready to kill God. Both Pip and Starbuck try to convince him to stop and go home, but I mean, we know that that's not gonna happen. So he gets in the one remaining boat because Moby Dick has smashed the other 2 to fucking pieces. And he goes after the whale again. And as they're approaching the whale, they see that Fedala's dead body is like tangled in the harpoon lines pinned to the side of the whale, which is like fucking haunting and terrifying, and it's ruined my fucking life, basically. Ahab realizes that Fedala's prophecy is coming true. Like, the fucking details that he gave earlier on are just, like, all happening. It's not too late to turn back. He knows that, he acknowledges that, but he can't. He's not going to. Personally, I think that seeing my dead friend tied to a whale would discourage me, but Ahab's built different, so he persists. Moby Dick almost capsizes the boat, and everybody's like falling out into the water, but most of them get back in. One of them gets left behind, but everybody else manages to stay in the boat and continues the chase. The whale turns on the ship and headbutts it and just like caves the side in, so now the ship is sinking. Ahab gives his death speech, his famous death speech. I'm not going to repeat it all, I'm sure you know what it is, and if you don't, Google it. And then, you know, throws his cursed harpoon at Moby Dick as he's diving, and the harpoon line, like, catches Ahab around the throat and pulls him in after him. And everybody up to this point had led me to believe that the whale eats Ahab, but that's not true. Ahab gets, like, dragged by the throat to hell, which is worse, in my opinion. So Ahab is just, like, doomed to keep chasing the whale forever, basically. And the ship is sinking, and it creates, like, a massive whirlpool, and everybody gets pulled in, and they all die. Except Ishmael, because Ishmael was the one guy that got thrown out of the boat. So he was just kind of, like, treading water in the middle distance, just, like, watching everybody die. And Queequeg's coffin lifeboat comes up out of the center of the whirlpool, and Ishmael grabs onto it and floats there for like a day until the Rachel shows up, searching for its missing children, but only finds another orphan. Alright, so that was a lot. As I've said, I highly recommend that you read this book. I don't think that I could do it justice, even if I really, really tried. Because it's a really fucking good book. Like, the reason that it's a classic is that it slaps. Obviously, I can't speak for everybody who enjoys this book, but one of the reasons that I connected with it so strongly is because of Ahab. I find him to be a deeply relatable character, which sounds weird to say out loud, but it is nonetheless true. Even though he is often considered to be like the villain of the story, there is a lot more to him than that. I think he's genuinely like one of the most interesting and complex characters ever written. I've talked about this on Tumblr before, so I'm not going to repeat everything. But I have had a lot of the same mental illness symptoms that Ahab displays over the course of the story. So I really, like, feel for him and understand what he's going through. And I could not imagine having to go through that in the 1800s when, like, nobody cares about you and they all just say that you're crazy and they, like, tie you up in your room and leave you for a month. And I understand the decisions that he makes. I think that they're all objectively the wrong decisions, but, like, I understand them on, like, a human level, why he does what he does. And, you know, because I live in the 21st century and I have access to things like therapy and medication, I got better instead of fucking off to sea and dying in a tragic whale incident. And honestly, I think that even if you can't personally relate to, like, the mental illness symptoms that he's having, a lot of people can relate to him. And I think maybe he even speaks to some fundamental quality of human nature. Like, if you earnestly believed that this whale was the avatar of an evil god, and by killing it you could forever free humanity of all suffering, wouldn't you try to kill it? 'Cause I probably would. See you next time, shipmates.